Have you ever woken up on a Monday morning feeling like you could take on the entire world, and then woken up on Wednesday feeling like you couldn't even get out of bed? Same person, same goals, same dreams. So why did your energy disappear? Why does motivation show up like a good friend one day and then vanish without saying goodbye the next? Today, we are going to answer that question, and I promise you, by the end of this episode, you will understand your own mind in a completely new way. By the time we finish today, you are going to understand exactly why motivation rises and falls, what is really happening inside your brain when you feel excited or when you feel stuck, and most importantly, you are going to walk away with a simple, practical system that helps you build motivation even on the days when you don't feel like doing anything at all. And of course, while we explore all of this together, you are also going to practice your English, because every idea in this episode comes wrapped in new vocabulary, natural expressions, and the kind of English that real people use when they talk about real life. I want to start by being completely honest with you. I know what it feels like to set a big goal on a Sunday night, full of energy and hope, and then to lose all of that energy by Tuesday afternoon. I know what it feels like to want to learn English so badly, to imagine yourself speaking confidently, and then to open your book 3 days later and feel absolutely nothing. No excitement, no energy, just tiredness. If this sounds familiar to you, I want you to know something important right now. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not lazy, and you are not weak. What you are experiencing is something every single human being experiences, and once you understand the science behind it, it stops feeling like a personal failure and starts feeling like something you can actually work with. So let's begin with the big question. What is motivation, really? In the simplest terms, motivation is the reason why we do something. It is the invisible force that pushes you to open your English book instead of watching another video, or that pushes you to go to the gym instead of staying on the sofa. But here is something important to understand before we go any further. Motivation is not the same thing as discipline, and it is not the same thing as energy either. Energy is your body's fuel. Discipline is your ability to act even without energy or motivation. And motivation itself is simply your desire, your reason, your why. When these three things work together, life feels easy. When they don't, everything feels like a struggle. Think about your own life for a second. Maybe you want to speak English fluently. That desire, that dream, is your motivation. The action you take toward that goal, whether you feel like it or not, is your discipline. And the physical fuel that lets you sit down and study for 20 minutes without falling asleep, that's your energy. All three matter. But today, we are focusing mainly on motivation, because understanding it changes everything else. Let's take a short trip back in time, because understanding where motivation comes from will help you understand why it behaves the way it does. Thousands of years ago, our ancestors didn't have to think about motivation the way we do today. They didn't need motivation to check social media less, or to finish an English course. Their motivation was much simpler and much more urgent. They needed motivation to find food, to stay safe from danger, to protect their families, and to build strong communities with other people. Their brains developed a very clear system. When something helped them survive, their brain rewarded them with a good feeling, so they would want to repeat that action again. This reward system kept them alive for thousands of years. And here is the fascinating part. Your brain today still works in almost the exact same way, even though your daily challenges look completely different. This brings us to one of the most important ideas of this entire episode, so listen carefully. Our brain, even now in the modern world, still wants to save energy. From an evolutionary point of view, using less energy meant a better chance of survival. So your brain naturally prefers the easiest path whenever possible. This is not laziness. This is biology. Understanding this single idea will completely change the way you think about your own motivation, so keep it in your mind as we continue. Now, let's talk about the brain itself, because I promise to keep this simple and easy to follow, even though we are talking about real neuroscience. Imagine your brain as a kind of control center, like the main office of a very busy company, sending instructions to every part of your body. Inside this control center, there is a chemical messenger called dopamine, and dopamine plays a huge role in motivation. Most people believe dopamine is simply the happiness chemical, but that idea is actually not completely accurate. Dopamine is much more connected to wanting something, expecting something, and moving toward a reward, rather than to happiness itself. Here is a simple way to picture it. Imagine your brain as a version of a map application, always searching for the fastest, easiest route to your reward. When you know a reward is coming, dopamine rises, and that rising feeling pushes you to take action. Think about the way you feel when you are waiting for a message from someone important to you, or when you're waiting for your favorite meal to arrive, or when you're about to open a package you ordered online. That excited, anticipating feeling, that's dopamine at work, not because you have already received the reward, but because your brain is expecting it. All right, let's pause here for a moment and practice, because I don't want you to just listen passively today. I want your brain to actually use this new vocabulary. So here's a simple exercise. I want you to say this sentence out loud, in your own voice, right now, wherever you are. Repeat after me. My brain wants to save energy. Say it again, a little louder this time. My brain wants to save energy. Perfect. Now try this next sentence and really pay attention to your pronunciation. Dopamine makes me want a reward. One more time, nice and clear. Dopamine makes me want a reward. Wonderful. You just practiced real English while learning real neuroscience, and that combination is exactly what makes this podcast different from a normal textbook. Now let's address the question that probably brought you to this episode in the first place. Why does motivation come and go? Why can you feel unstoppable one day and completely empty the next? The truth is, nobody, not one single person on this planet, stays motivated all the time. Not the most successful business owner, not the most disciplined athlete, not even the most passionate English teacher. Motivation naturally rises and falls because of many different factors working together. How well you slept, how much stress you're carrying, your physical health, the environment around you, your emotions in that particular moment, and simply the natural chemistry happening inside your brain. I like to compare motivation to the weather. Some days are sunny, full of light and energy, and everything feels possible. Other days are rainy and gray, and you just want to stay inside and do nothing. And just like the weather, this is completely normal. You wouldn't blame yourself for a rainy day, right? So why do we blame ourselves so harshly for a low motivation day? Let me tell you a short story about one of my students, a young woman named Elif, who has been learning English with our community for almost a year now. When Elif first joined, she was full of energy. She studied every single day. She watched English videos every night, and she made incredible progress in just a few weeks. But then, 1 month, everything changed. Life got busy, she felt tired all the time, and she completely stopped studying for almost 2 weeks. She sent me a message saying, "I think I lost my motivation forever. Maybe I'm just not made for this." I want you to notice something in her words, because it's something many learners say without realizing it. She didn't say, "I'm having a difficult week." She said, "forever," as if a temporary rainy day meant the sun would never come back. I told her exactly what I'm telling you now. Motivation is like weather, not like a permanent personality trait. A rainy week doesn't mean the sun is gone forever. It simply means you're in a rainy period right now, and rainy periods always pass. This leads us naturally to one of the most powerful psychological concepts we'll explore today. So I want you to really absorb this: the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation means doing something because you genuinely enjoy the activity itself, not because of any external reward. Think about reading a novel purely because you love the story, or drawing simply because it relaxes you, or, in our case, learning a language because the process itself excites you, because you love the feeling of understanding a new word or expressing an idea you couldn't express before. Extrinsic motivation, on the other hand, means doing something because of an outside reward. Money, grades, praise from other people, a promotion at work. These are all extrinsic motivators. Now here's an important question I want you to think about honestly. Which type of motivation tends to last longer? Research and simple observation both point to the same answer. Intrinsic motivation tends to be far more stable and long-lasting, because it doesn't depend on outside circumstances that you can't always control. That doesn't mean extrinsic motivation is bad, not at all. It can be a powerful starting push, and there's nothing wrong with wanting a certificate, a better job, or recognition from other people. Many learners begin their English journey purely for extrinsic reasons, perhaps a job requirement or an upcoming exam, and that's a completely valid way to start. But if you want motivation that survives difficult weeks, difficult seasons, and difficult years, at some point you need to connect with the intrinsic reason underneath your goal, because external rewards have a way of losing their power over time. A certificate feels exciting the day you imagine earning it, but it rarely feels exciting enough on its own to pull you out of bed on a tired Tuesday morning 6 months later. Ask yourself honestly, why do you really want to speak English? Is it only for a certificate? Or is there something deeper? Some version of yourself you're excited to become? Maybe it's the version of you who can travel confidently and have real conversations with strangers in another country. Maybe it's the version of you who can finally watch your favorite films without subtitles, understanding every joke, every emotion, every small detail. Maybe it's simply the quiet pride of becoming someone who didn't give up. Whatever that deeper reason is for you, it's worth spending a few minutes discovering it, because that reason will still be there for you long after the excitement of a new goal has faded. Let's practice again, because repetition is how new English truly settles into your memory. I want you to describe your own motivation out loud, using this pattern. I am learning English because... Pause the episode for a moment if you need to, and actually say your reason out loud in English. Don't worry about grammar mistakes, just speak. This single sentence, spoken honestly, connects directly to what we just learned about intrinsic motivation. And saying your why out loud in English makes that reason feel more real and more powerful. Now let's talk about something almost every single English learner struggles with at some point: procrastination. What exactly is procrastination? Simply put, it's delaying something you know you should do, even when you know delaying it will cause problems later. Many people believe procrastination happens because a person is lazy, but that idea is actually incomplete and, honestly, a little unfair. Procrastination is much more often the brain's way of avoiding discomfort, not avoiding effort itself. Think about the reasons behind procrastination: fear of making mistakes, wanting everything to be perfect before starting, having goals that feel unclear or overwhelming, facing a task that feels simply too big, having low physical energy, or living in an environment full of distractions. When an English learner avoids speaking practice because they're afraid of sounding wrong, that's not laziness. That's fear wearing the costume of laziness. When someone avoids opening their grammar book because the whole language feels like an enormous mountain, that's overwhelm, not a lack of discipline. Understanding this changes everything, because instead of punishing yourself for procrastinating, you can start asking a much more useful question. What discomfort am I actually trying to avoid right now? While we're on this subject, let's talk about the hidden enemies that quietly destroy motivation without you even noticing them. Social media is one of the biggest culprits, not because scrolling itself is evil, but because it constantly compares your everyday reality to other people's carefully chosen highlights. Comparison is a silent motivation killer. Negative self-talk is another dangerous enemy. The voice inside your head that whispers, "You'll never really speak this language well." A voice that many learners hear far too often. Poor sleep quietly drains your motivation because your brain simply doesn't have enough resources to feel enthusiastic when it's exhausted. Too much stress does the same thing, using up mental energy that would otherwise go toward your goals. Having no clear goals and no consistent routine leaves your motivation floating without direction, like a boat without a destination, drifting wherever the current takes it, instead of moving purposefully towards something meaningful. And there's one more hidden enemy that most people have never even heard of, but that affects every single person on this planet, every single day: decision fatigue. Decision fatigue happens when your brain becomes tired simply from making too many small decisions throughout the day. What should I wear? What should I eat? Should I answer this message now or later? Should I study English now or after dinner? Each of these tiny decisions uses a small amount of your brain's mental energy, and by the evening, after dozens and dozens of these little choices, there's often very little energy left for anything that requires real willpower, including your English practice. This is exactly why so many people feel motivated in the morning, but completely drained by nighttime. And it's also exactly why successful people often simplify their daily decisions as much as possible. Choosing the same simple breakfast every day, or studying at the exact same time every single day, so their brain doesn't have to spend precious energy deciding when or how to begin. The good news is that once you can name all of these hidden enemies clearly: social media comparison, negative self-talk, poor sleep, too much stress, unclear goals, and decision fatigue. You gain real power over them, because it's very difficult to fight something invisible, but it becomes much easier to fight something you can clearly see, clearly name, and clearly understand. Now, here comes what I consider the single most practical idea in this entire episode, so please give this your full attention. Most people believe motivation has to come first, and only after feeling motivated can they finally take action. But real psychology, and honestly, real life experience, tells us something almost the opposite. Action very often comes first, and motivation follows right behind it. This is the power of small habits and small wins. You don't need to feel a huge wave of motivation to open your English notebook. You simply need to take one tiny action, and that tiny action creates a small feeling of accomplishment. And that small feeling of accomplishment creates a little spark of dopamine. And that little spark naturally pulls you toward wanting to continue. Read just one page. Walk for 5 minutes. Study English for just 10 minutes. Clean just one table in your house. Drink one full glass of water first thing in the morning. These tiny actions might look almost too small to matter, but they matter enormously because they build momentum, and momentum is far more powerful and far more reliable than waiting around for inspiration to magically appear. Let's pause again for another quick speaking practice, because your voice needs exercise just as much as your mind does. Repeat after me, clearly and with confidence. Small actions create big motivation. One more time, and really feel the meaning behind these words as you say them. Small actions create big motivation. Excellent. Now here's a small challenge for you, right in the middle of this episode. Think of one tiny English action you could complete today. Something so small it feels almost silly, like reading one sentence or saying one new word out loud 3 times. Choose it right now, in your mind. That small choice you just made is more powerful than it seems. Let's go a little deeper into dopamine now, because there is an important difference between what I like to call healthy dopamine and what I call unhealthy dopamine. And understanding this difference can genuinely protect your long-term motivation. Healthy sources of dopamine include things like exercise, learning something new, spending time in nature, listening to music you love, and having meaningful conversations with people who matter to you. These sources build you up slowly and sustainably. Unhealthy sources of dopamine, on the other hand, include things like endless scrolling through social media, spending hours gaming without any real break, eating too much junk food, and constantly reacting to notifications on your phone. These unhealthy sources give you a very quick, very intense spike of pleasure, followed by an equally fast crash, and over time, this pattern can actually make your brain less sensitive to smaller, healthier rewards, like the quiet satisfaction of finishing a good English lesson. This doesn't mean you need to eliminate every enjoyable distraction from your life completely. That would be unrealistic and honestly unnecessary. It simply means finding a healthy balance, making sure the healthy sources of dopamine remain the foundation of your daily life. Let me share a small story about another student, a man named Thomas, because I think his experience will resonate with many of you listening right now. Thomas told me once that after a long day of work, he would come home completely exhausted, and instead of studying English, he would scroll through videos on his phone for nearly 2 hours every single night. He felt guilty about it, but he also felt physically unable to stop. When we talked about it, I asked him a simple question. What would happen if, instead of forcing yourself to study for a full hour, you simply opened your English app for 5 minutes before allowing yourself to scroll? Thomas tried this small change, and something interesting happened. Most nights, after those 5 minutes, he actually continued studying for much longer because he had already overcome the hardest part, which is simply beginning. A few weeks later, Thomas sent me a message that I still think about often. He said that he used to measure success by how much he studied, an entire hour or nothing at all, and because an entire hour often felt impossible after a long day of work, he ended up choosing nothing far too often. But once he lowered the bar to 5 minutes, something shifted inside him. He wasn't failing anymore. He was succeeding every single day, even on the nights when 5 minutes really was all he managed. And that feeling of daily success, small as it was, quietly rebuilt his confidence and his motivation at the same time. This is the real magic hidden inside small habits. Beginning is almost always harder than continuing. And once you make beginning small enough, almost impossible to refuse, you remove the biggest obstacle standing between you and your goal. Let's take a moment here for another short practice, because Thomas's story gives us the perfect sentence to work with. Repeat after me. Beginning is harder than continuing. Say it once more, slowly, and really notice each word. Beginning is harder than continuing. Now think of your own 5-minute version of English practice, the smallest possible action you could take on your busiest, most exhausted day. Say it out loud. My 5-minute habit is... Whatever you just said, hold on to that sentence, because it might become the very thing that keeps your motivation alive during your next difficult week. Now, I want to talk about how successful people in any field actually stay motivated, because I think this idea often gets misunderstood. Many people imagine that successful athletes, successful writers, and successful language learners feel constantly, endlessly motivated, as if they never experience a single lazy or tired day. This simply isn't true, and honestly, believing this myth can be quite discouraging. Successful people lose motivation just as often as everyone else does. The real difference between them and everyone else isn't the presence of constant motivation, it's what they do during the moments when motivation disappears. They keep going anyway, using habits like careful planning, consistent routines, proper rest, a supportive environment, and, perhaps most powerfully, a strong sense of identity. Think about athletes who train every single morning, even in freezing weather, even after a disappointing loss the day before. Think about writers who sit down at their desk at the same hour every day, even when no brilliant ideas seem to arrive. Think about business owners who keep showing up to work through slow months, uncertain months, sometimes even frightening months. None of these people feel a constant, glowing fire of motivation every single day. What they share instead is a system strong enough to carry them through the days when the fire goes quiet. And this applies directly to language learners, too. The learners who eventually reach fluency are almost never the ones who felt the most excitement in their very first week. They are the ones who kept showing up, gently and consistently, long after the initial excitement naturally faded. When someone begins to think of themselves as a person who learns English every day, rather than a person who is trying to learn English, their actions naturally start matching that identity, even on days when motivation feels completely absent, because identity is a far more powerful and far more reliable engine than any temporary burst of enthusiasm. This connects perfectly to something I want to speak about honestly and directly, because it matters so much to everyone listening to this podcast. Motivation specifically for learning English. So many learners quit, not because they lack ability, but for very human reasons. Fear of making mistakes in front of other people, constantly comparing their progress to someone else's, someone who perhaps started earlier or has more free time, and feeling discouraged because their progress feels painfully slow. Here is something I want you to remember every single time you feel discouraged. Progress in language learning is very often invisible in the short term. You don't usually notice your own improvement day by day, the same way you don't notice a plant growing while you're staring directly at it. But come back a month later, or 3 months later, and the difference becomes undeniable. This is exactly why consistent podcast listening helps so much, because with every single episode, even without you fully realizing it, your listening skills sharpen, your vocabulary quietly expands, your pronunciation naturally improves, your confidence slowly builds, and your consistency itself becomes a habit, and eventually, an identity. Let's do one more speaking practice before we move toward the end of today's episode. I want you to describe, in your own words and in English, one small piece of progress you've noticed in yourself recently, even something tiny, like understanding a sentence you wouldn't have understood a few months ago. Say it out loud. I noticed that I... Take a moment and really say it. That sentence you just spoke is proof, real proof, that your brain is changing, even on the days when it doesn't feel that way. Now, I promised you earlier that this episode would give you a practical system, and here it is, simple enough to use starting today. Each morning, choose just one small goal for that day. Nothing overwhelming, just one clear target. Sometime during your afternoon, take one small action toward that goal, even if it's tiny. In the evening, before you sleep, take a moment to celebrate that one success, out loud if possible, because celebrating, even quietly, tells your brain that this behavior deserves to be repeated. Once a week, review your overall progress, honestly, without judgment. And once a month, adjust your goals based on what you've learned about yourself. This simple rhythm, morning goal, afternoon action, evening celebration, weekly review, monthly adjustment, might look almost too simple to work. But simplicity is exactly why it works so well, because a system you can actually follow will always beat a perfect system you eventually abandon. Most people don't fail because their plan wasn't good enough. They fail because their plan was too complicated to follow on a tired, ordinary Tuesday. And a plan that only works on your best days isn't really a plan at all. It's a wish. This 5-step rhythm was designed on purpose to survive your worst days too. Because your goal for the morning can be as small as a single sentence. Your action for the afternoon can take less than 5 minutes, and your celebration in the evening can be as simple as a quiet smile and the honest thought, "I showed up today." Over weeks and months, these small, repeated moments quietly become the foundation of real, lasting fluency. Before we finish, let's clear up a few common myths about motivation, because these myths quietly damage so many people's confidence. The first myth: I need motivation before I can start. As we discussed today, action very often creates motivation, not the other way around. The second myth: successful people never feel lazy. As we just learned, Everyone experiences low-energy days without exception. The third myth: I failed because I have no motivation. In truth, most failure comes from a missing system, not a missing feeling. And the fourth myth: some people are simply born naturally motivated. Motivation is far more connected to habits, environment, and identity than to any fixed personality someone was born with. Nobody arrives on this earth with a permanent, unlimited supply of motivation built into their character. What looks like natural motivation from the outside is almost always, if you look closely enough, the quiet result of small habits practiced consistently, an environment designed to make the right choice, the easy choice, and a sense of identity that was built slowly, action by action, over time. Let's bring everything together now, because we've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to make sure the most important ideas stay with you long after this episode ends. Motivation naturally changes, rising and falling like weather, and that's completely normal, not a personal failure. Habits matter far more than fleeting feelings of inspiration, because habits keep working even on the days when motivation disappears completely. Small actions, even ones that feel almost too small to matter, grow steadily into big, meaningful results over time. Your brain is not fixed. It can genuinely change and adapt through consistent practice, a concept scientists call neuroplasticity, and this means the English learner you are today is not the English learner you're destined to remain forever. Consistency will always beat intensity in the long run, because a small, steady flame lasts far longer than a brief, brilliant fire that burns out quickly. And finally, hope itself is powerful, not as a passive feeling you wait for, but as an active belief that keeps you moving forward, one small, imperfect step at a time. So here is your challenge for this week, and I want it to feel genuinely easy, not intimidating. Every single day this week, take just one small English action, even something as small as saying one new sentence out loud. That's the entire challenge. Nothing more complicated than that. And here's my question for our community, because I would genuinely love to hear from you. What is the one small habit you're going to start today to keep your motivation alive, even on your difficult days? Share your answer with our community, because reading how other learners are building their own momentum is often deeply motivating in itself. Remember, motivation is not something you wait for. It is something you build, one small action at a time. Every tiny step you take today is quietly shaping your future self. Keep learning, keep practicing your English, and never stop believing in your own progress. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care, and happy learning.